We get this question a lot. How can I improve my character design? You might not like it, but the answer is always more study, going back to the basics and getting gooder at drawing.
Just like a musician practices scales over and over, so too should the artist.
In this video, we are going to give you 15 exercises to improve your character design. All the way from primitive exercises for line confidence and basic structure,
to advanced exercises for more expressive drawing and creativity. If you want to improve your characters, foundation, foundation, foundation. BAM is the show where professional animation artists redraw the art that you send in. And if you like supporting that sort of thing, check out our Patreon linked below.
These exercises can be done in any medium, although we do recommend using pen and paper.
By taking away the ability to erase or Control-Z, you're going to have to commit to your mistakes and build more tactical drawing confidence.
Today, we are going to be using the down shooter to do these exercises along with you. That way, you guys can all get a good look at my weird little thumbs.
Section 1, wrist warm-ups. You'll want to start by warming up your wrist and getting ready to draw. We need to get you and your hand to a place where you're no longer afraid of a blank piece of paper. You're ready and willing to make mistakes.
Circles. We're going to want to draw some circles about the size of a dime. So if you mess up, no problem. Just keep going, fill up a whole page with these.
Straight lines. Fill a page with perfectly straight parallel lines and try not to let them touch. Do this in one quick motion for line confidence. This is a warm-up for your shoulder. You're going to want to use your whole arm in this motion so you get a perfectly straight line that goes the whole page. I like to pull my lines. I tend to have a little bit better control if I do that, but you can push as well. Ideally, you want to be able to do both. Next, draw them perpendicular to make a grid. I'm making some linen cloth here. I've got some 200 count sheets right here. They're just a little bit scratchy. For an added challenge, make 2 random dots on the paper and try to connect the 2 dots with a line. You can even practice the motion you're going to make a few times, sort of like a golfer teeing up for a swing.
The next exercise is gradients. We're going to create a gradient by layering parallel lines. Try to keep it within a rectangle shape. This is an exercise in control of your pen or pencil pressure. By shading within a confined space, you practice edge control. Being able to master hard and soft edges is the key to realistic shading and lighting. Blind contour drawing.
Take a look at something like a model, a plant, or your hand, and try to draw it without actually looking at the paper. Keep your pencil on the paper and don't lift up, and only look at the model as you trace the contours of it.
This exercise forces you to pay attention to details that you might be missing. Let your hand flow slowly, from detail to detail, instead of creating your brain's interpretation of it.
You've probably seen this phenomenon before. When a kid draws a person's face, they usually put their eyes up here at the top of a person's head, even though our eyes are in the center. Our brains tend to fixate on areas of detail over blank space, so we tend to miss the importance of these areas, and thus the distorted memory becomes the drawing. What we're doing here is we're learning to draw with the right side of our brain, which actually comes from a book of the same name.
It's like a hand-eye team building exercise. You focus on seeing, and then let your hand do a trust fall. Don't judge the mistakes that it makes.
Wonderful. Oh my gosh, there it is. It looks adorable. Max, I think you got the only hands that you could find on Wikifeet. Section 2, understanding structure. Now that your wrist is ready, let's focus on more in-depth organic studies, something to help you see the true shapes behind the subjects you're drawing and how those forms work. Freehand Box. Here's how you probably learned to draw a box in elementary school. You drew 2 squares and then attached to the corners like so. This is a neat trick, but it doesn't really account for perspective, a subject which we have a whole video about here. Basically, we want you to imagine that these lines are going to a vanishing point on the horizon line. But don't draw out the whole perspective grid, just conceptualize it in your head and draw the box freehand. Completely draw through every cube so that all 6 sides of it are visible. Here's an example of where some of the sides are too long, so the cube becomes more of a rectangle. Here's an example of a box where the lines are not going to the same vanishing point, so the box becomes impossible. We want to keep them all believable.
And here is a good drawing. If you're a total beginner, pause the video here and try to copy what's on screen.
Arrow drawing. Next, we are going to combine our box with a triangular prism. This makes an arrow, which we're going to practice drawing with 2 techniques. Curved arrows. Draw a curve, and then draw it again. Add a little arrow tip and connect the 2 curves together. Once you've got the hang of that, try to gradually widen the distance between the 2 lines to create some perspective, like the arrow is coming right towards you. Bent arrows. Same process, but with 2 bent lines. This one will require a little bit more perspective, but give it a shot. Adding a little bit of shading will go a long way here. This exercise is to familiarize you with all 3 dimensions of space and get you used to plunging into the depth of the scene, rather than sticking to the flat space that's defined by the paper itself. Your paper should be more of a window. Wireframing organic structure, one of my personal favorite exercises. We'll start with some blobs. This might seem like an obvious statement, but the real world doesn't have any lines. So normally when we see things with our eyes, we perceive the world with light. Value. And color. But when we draw, we're trying to portray all those things on a sheet of bright white paper. So we separate objects with silhouetted lines. And we mimic light and value with overlapping lines, called crosshatching. If you want to be effective at this, you'll need to understand this form like a 3D model. So we're going to create a wireframe over these silhouettes to get a deeper understanding of the structure. Drawing these type of curves on any silhouette is going to help us see how the object is oriented in space. It always helps to start with a center line. Imagine these silhouettes getting cut in half like an avocado and draw the center line along the incision. And there's no quote-unquote correct answer here. Look at all these different ways that I've interpreted this structure with the same silhouette. If you're a real beginner, try adding some ellipses to a simple sausage form. Pay attention to the width of the ellipses. After all, these are basically cylinders. Let's finish this off. And if you really want to see the master of this, you should look at Mobius, the comic book artist. He's using minimal lines to portray these massive amounts of space and depth and even lighting. And he does so by wireframing very selectively on these objects. Mobius, or Moibus, I don't really know how his name's pronounced. He's just using lines on white paper to create depth. So take a look at that for inspiration. It's looking pretty good. I like the way this looks. There's lots of dimension in here, and it really looks like you're looking into like a big bacteria swarm or a close-up of amoeba.
Improvisational perspective.
So what we want to do is we want to fill a page with boxes and rectangles that all sort of have their own perspective vanishing points. There's a lot of things in a background that won't necessarily align with the perspective grid. You know, grids are very useful, but there's going to be things that are tilted at a different angle, like cars or boxes or even some buildings. And you're going to want to be able to draw those without having to set up more perspective grids. We want big, medium, and small shapes.
That's going to make for a more interesting design.
I'm just outlining a few things. The closer the object is to you, the thicker the outlines. You could do this while you're watching a BAM episode.
Structure Master Studies. This exercise is going to require a timer and a character model sheet from the show of your choice. Start the timer and trace over the character using only cylinders and spheres. We want to understand the large geometric shapes that make up this character's structure. Facial features, fingers, and other small details are irrelevant for this exercise, which is why we have the time limit.
Like a classical master study, but with a drawing of Bart Simpson.
Remember to always include a center line. This will help you measure better when you redraw the character in a new pose, for example. You can also do this by drawing on a newspaper.
And if you don't have a newspaper, just hop in your time machine and go back 30 years.
Many iconic characters feature design elements that are indicators of their basic geometric structure. These are measuring tools. It's much easier to redraw Superman consistently when you know that these elements indicate his basic structure. And a redesign like this might be less iconic and harder for other artists to replicate. And I legitimately use this exercise in my professional life as a character designer. When I'm starting on a new show, I'll set a timer and trace the main cast multiple times, so when I design a new character from scratch, it will match the rest of the designs.
This exercise works great for backgrounds too.
Section 3, Gestural Drawing.
Gesture is the first step in drawing figures, and it is a loose, expressive sketch that captures a character's direction and purpose. Gesture drawings are great because they are expressive foundational drawings that have lots of energy and are drawn very quickly. Our first gesture exercise is going to be stick figures. Pretty self-explanatory here. Just draw some stick figures. Draw them acting, draw them fighting, jumping up, jumping down in perspective. Keep it gestural. This exercise is to demonstrate that if your character is capable of expressing clear acting on the level of a stick figure, adding details will only make it more powerful. Whereas if the poses looked vague when they are stick figures, they will still look just as vague fully rendered.
Depending on your level of stylization, you can give your figures a bit more structure by thinking of them along these lines.
When I do my personal animation, I always start with a stick figure.
In the future, we intend to make an entire video on figure drawing, but for this video, we're going to explain two very basic exercises for drawing the human figure. These exercises can be done with photo reference, but you're going to gain the most skill by drawing from real life. Our model is going to be art model legend Zine Trevino. If you don't have access to a live art model, ask your friends to pose for you, or ask your mom if you don't have any friends. Begin with a line of action. The line of action is an imaginary line that signifies the greatest force or movement released from the body. Always shaped like a C or an S, this line occurs when the force of the body moves away from the center of mass. There can sometimes be a secondary line of action if the limbs are perpendicular or if the character is holding some sort of weapon. It's very simple. Observe the model for a moment and then draw a very quick line indicating the force. Then add the head, the arms, the body, and all the other details that you have time for. The point of this exercise is to break you out of a structure mindset. Not only will this line create flow and energy, but it will act as a guide for the character's full body on the page. If you're a total beginner, you can practice finding the line of action on photos, like this. Whirlpool figure drawing. Using the drawings that you've already done, scribble in the form of the model like a wire tornado, wrapping all around the shapes. See the body as a series of tubes and essentially scribble along the structure of all those tubes. This will help you understand the model in 3D space while simultaneously giving the loose expressive energy of a sketch. Looking good, lots of structure comprehension here. These two exercises are merely baby steps in your figure drawing lifetime. I've been doing figure drawing since high school, and my current practice is to use the model as an on-the-spot inspiration to design an entire character.
Section 4. Exercises for creativity.
Don't think, do, dull. Doodle anything. An explosion of shapes, squiggles, and shading. Fill up a whole page. How do you draw when you're not thinking? When your brain is switched off or occupied with another task? This type of drawing is incredibly freeing, so let the doodle evolve and just take you by surprise. It doesn't matter how it looks because, hey, it's just a doodle. I actually stole this exercise from an interview I saw on Proco's channel.
And this is what Mobius showed you?
Yes.
Oh, that's how you pronounce it.
He'd be doing these like strange doodle-like things, and I'd say, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm just letting my mind relax.
Notice us, Proco. Puzzle heads. Here's some examples of this exercise. Begin by drawing a bunch of blobs on a canvas like this, so that they fit together like puzzle pieces. Now attempt to design each blob as a character's head. Faces are very diverse, so the more that you push some of these, the more personality that you're going to get out of them. This will allow you to find creative solutions and happy accidents that will be in the weird spaces in between.
Those are super fun. Scribble characters. Have a friend draw you a random scribble and try to come up with a full drawing using the scribble as a base. Now spin the scribble 90 degrees and repeat. I had to really stretch my brain to find these designs from the scribble. Here are some designs that Max did, and here are some designs that our friend Jen Wolf did. Notice how none of us interpreted the scribble in the same way. And check out more of Jen's work on Instagram.
Okay, let's do some redrawing.
This is the part of the video where you're asking, okay, but how does this help me draw my cartoon characters, or how can I use this on my realistic anime designs?
Let me show you. Maya sent in this drawing, and my main critique is that the pose could be pushed so much further. I'm gonna do some gesture drawing experiments to push this pose and get the line of action much stronger. Now, I didn't just do this all at once, I filled up an entire page of possibilities. I looked at sword fighting videos, reference poses, and I even had a friend swing a broom handle around while I took photos. I kept all these gesture sketches loose and ended up liking this one the best. Since I want this to look like an animated show, I referenced Russian animator Anna Katish for the style. What I wanted to accomplish with this redraw was to improve the pose with a strong line of action. What do you think?
Kenny Cooper sent us this one, and I can see that he's going for something somewhat realistically stylized.
I really like his design, so we're going to use it to practice drawing a dynamic pose. First, we're going to do a structure master study and see this character as a series of tubes and shapes. We'll follow this up with a rough gesture drawing of the pose. I really like those classic Jack Kirby covers where the character is running right towards the camera. I'll follow this up by drawing the pose as a stick figure and doing the Whirlpool exercise. I'm purposely staying as loose and rough as possible, Now it's time to break this character down with the skills that we learned by wireframing the organic structure. We make sure that there's a center line on every single shape. Since we spent so much time getting a good foundation drawing, adding the clothes, the hair, and the other accoutrement is gonna be a breeze. Pro tip: I'm gonna clean this up with a very thin line. Thinner lines tend to be used on animated shows with more realistic designs. This allows you to focus on the believable volume of the characters instead of the stylized line work. And we'll finish this off with color. A simple drop shadow and some highlights will go a really long way. It's said that the line art does all the work, but the color takes all the credit. Now, what about something stylized? This drawing was submitted by Hannah Isaiah, and it's awesome, but the shapes could be pushed much further. I want to experiment with new head and body shapes. Remember the exercise where we were fitting the faces onto blobs? Let's use that here and create something really iconic. Something with strong silhouette that's much more pushed.
I know at times that drawing can feel somewhat ephemeral in nature. Like creativity is just this kind of magical spark that strikes you once, and you're supposed to be able to make the perfect drawing and perfect piece of art in one sitting. But in reality, it is a lot more like working out and keeping up with regular exercise. Drawing and paper are not precious, and you should be comfortable with making a lot of mistakes and preliminary studies. I want you to fill up pages of your sketchbook with exercises like the ones we've shown you, and I promise that in time, your character drawings will become more solid and more expressive because you've essentially been going to the art gym and working out.
We wanted to gamify these exercises and make them fun because mileage is more important than quality. Stephen King has 65 novels out. A lot of them are terrible, but a couple of them are legendary pieces of horror fiction. It's all about how you frame it in your mind. Lower your standards, treat it like a job, clock in, clock out, go to the art gym, do the reps, and eventually something will turn out good. At BAM, we want to turn you into bad art machines. We want you to make as much bad art as possible.
And if you want to see your art redrawn in an episode, send it to bam.redrawmyart@gmail.com.
Thanks.